Imagine being stopped right outside your own home, your car wrecked, your dignity stripped away, and your hands forced into cold steel cuffs. Not because you did anything wrong, but because of a single assumption. But what happens when the officers realize they've made the biggest mistake of their lives? Stay with us until the end to witness how justice finds its way. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. The night air was thick with silence, the kind that carried weight, the kind that told you something was about to go very wrong. A sleek black sedan sat under the dim glow of a streetlight, its body now scarred with dents and broken glass. The scent of burnt rubber lingered, mixing with the faint, metallic tinge of injustice in the air. The distant hum of a car engine echoed in the background, fading into the stillness of the night, as if the world itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold. Then came the sound, boots on pavement. Slow, deliberate, filled with unshakable confidence. The rhythm of their steps was neither rushed nor hesitant, but steady, measured, a march of authority unchecked. The gravel underfoot crunched softly, the only real indication that something was moving in the darkness. Hands on the hood, one of the officers ordered, his voice calm but coated in certainty. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He believed he already knew how this night would end, and in his mind, the script had already been written. Nathaniel Carter stood tall, his heartbeat steady but his mind racing. He wasn't an ignorant young man who would act out of anger. He knew the rules of this game, the silent laws that had dictated nights like this for generations. And that made it worse. The weight of history pressed against his chest, the ghosts of similar stories whispering in his ears, reminding him of all the others who had stood in his position before him. He had only arrived home moments ago, his navy blue suit still crisp, his leather briefcase filled with nothing but legal documents. Yet here he was, treated as if he were a criminal, a man out of place in his own neighborhood. The irony was bitter. A man of the law, subjected to its abuses. His fingers curled slightly around the handle of his briefcase, a silent protest, a last grip on his own dignity before it was inevitably challenged. The officers didn't see a man who had spent years defending justice, who had walked the halls of power, shaping decisions that affected thousands. They saw only what they wanted to see, a shadow where they didn't expect one, a disruption to the order they thought they understood. Nathaniel's breath was slow, controlled, but each inhale felt heavier, as if the very air around him carried the weight of assumption. He didn't move, not because he was afraid, but because he understood the game. He had seen it too many times before, not in person, but in courtrooms, in testimonies, in the files of men who hadn't been able to stop what was coming next. The moment stretched, the streetlights casting long shadows, elongating the figures that surrounded him. The city around them remained indifferent, unaware that on this quiet night, justice was being put to the test yet again. Nathaniel barely had time to register what was happening before he heard it, the sickening crack of a baton against his taillight. The sound echoed in the still night air, reverberating through his bones like an omen of what was to come. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice firm but controlled, though his pulse had already begun to quicken. The red-haired officer smirked, his baton still gripped tightly in his hand. "Looking for contraband." There it was. The assumption. The excuse. The unspoken rule that a man like him driving a car like this in a neighborhood like this meant trouble. Nathaniel clenched his fists. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to fight back, to demand respect, to force them to acknowledge the absurdity of what they were doing. But he knew better. He had spent years in courtrooms watching how these moments played out, seeing how a single decision made in anger could cost a man his freedom, or worse. "I live here," he said, keeping his voice measured, his posture steady, though his insides churned with a mix of frustration and fear. The taller officer let out a short, humorless laugh, one devoid of amusement, but full of something else, superiority, arrogance, certainty. "Sure you do." They weren't looking for answers. They weren't looking for explanations. They were looking for a reason to escalate. And when they didn't find one, they decided to create their own. The red-haired officer circled his car, his hand skimming over the smooth surface like he owned it. "Nice ride. You sure you didn't borrow it?" Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "I can show you my registration. My ID. "Oh, we'll see about that." the taller officer interjected. He moved toward the driver's side door, his baton tapping against the window in a slow, menacing rhythm. "Pop the trunk." Nathaniel hesitated, not without a warrant. The officer's eyes darkened, and in that moment, Nathaniel knew he had crossed an invisible line. A challenge had been issued, and these men did not like to be challenged. The air between them grew heavier, thick with unsaid words and barely restrained hostility. "Step back," the taller officer ordered, his voice sharper now, edged with authority. "Turn around." Nathaniel remained still, his body tense, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He could comply and hope they would lose interest. He could resist and risk giving them the justification they craved. Either way, he knew one thing for certain. This night was far from over. With a swift movement, cold metal clamped around Nathaniel's wrists. The officers didn't hesitate. They had already decided his fate before they even saw his face. Across the street, porch lights flickered on. Shadows moved behind curtains. Neighbors watching, but not intervening. Some turned away, unwilling to witness yet another injustice unfold. Others lingered, their curiosity outweighing their fear, but none dared to step forward. This wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about control, about reminding him that he didn't belong here, about asserting their dominance in a world where the balance of power was often skewed. The click of the cuffs echoed in Nathaniel's ears, a sound that had marked the end for so many before him. But not this time. Nathaniel breathed in slowly, steadying himself, refusing to let the weight of the moment crush him. He had spent years mastering control of his emotions, his words, his very presence. This was no different. The hands gripping his arms were rough, unforgiving, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his head, his expression unreadable. One of the officers, the red-haired one, smirked. "Bet you didn't expect this when you pulled up, huh?" Nathaniel exhaled, his voice calm but firm. "You don't even know who I am." The taller officer scoffed, his grip tightening. "Oh, we know exactly who you are." Nathaniel let the moment linger. And then, in a voice that was smooth as steel, deliberate and unshaken, he said the 5 words that changed everything. "I am a federal judge." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. The smirk on the red-haired officer's face faltered. The grip on his arms loosened, just slightly, but enough. Enough for Nathaniel to see the shift, the flicker of doubt, the realization that this was not going to go the way they had planned. The street was silent, the tension so thick it was nearly suffocating. The air around them was no longer charged with the certainty of unchecked power, but with the weight of a catastrophic mistake. The silence that followed was deafening, stretching across the space between them like an invisible force pressing down with undeniable weight. The street, once filled with an air of unchecked authority, now held a tension so thick it seemed to consume the night itself. The officer who had been so quick to cuff him froze, his fingers twitching around the cold steel restraints as if second-guessing their placement. His partner, who had torn through Nathaniel's car with reckless abandon, took a shaky step back, suddenly unsure of himself. The night had shifted, and they could feel it. What?" the red-haired officer stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he had suddenly realized he had walked into a trap of his own making. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, his gaze unyielding. His voice was deliberate, unwavering. "You heard me." For the first time that night, the confidence drained from their faces. The arrogance, the smirks, the unwavering belief in their authority, it all disappeared in an instant, replaced with something else. Fear. And then, with excruciating slowness, Nathaniel pulled his arms forward just enough for his tailored jacket sleeve to slide back. The motion, though subtle, carried the weight of finality. And then, glinting under the streetlight, came the undeniable proof. A badge. Not just any badge. A federal ID. The embodiment of the very system they thought they controlled. The officers stared. Their faces turned pale, drained of any remaining bravado. Their futures unraveled before their eyes, playing out in rapid succession. The complaints, the investigations, the headlines. The realization hit them like a freight train. The power they had so casually wielded was gone. And now, for the first time, they were on the other side of the law they had once twisted to their advantage. "Sir, this was a misunderstanding," the red-haired officer muttered, his voice unsteady, now laced with a nervous tremor that betrayed the reality settling in. Nathaniel tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Oh, because you had plenty to say before. What happened? His voice carried an icy calm, a stark contrast to the palpable fear creeping into their stiffened postures. Neither officer could respond. Their silence spoke louder than their excuses ever could. The arrogance that once filled their eyes had now been replaced with something else entirely pure, unfiltered dread. And then, the deep growl of an approaching engine shattered the night. A sleek black SUV rolled up, its presence carrying undeniable authority. The headlights sliced through the dimly lit street like a blade, illuminating the scene with an eerie clarity that only heightened the weight of what was unfolding. A man in a perfectly pressed suit stepped out. His demeanor was poised, his steps purposeful. He didn't look at the officers, because they no longer mattered. His focus was solely on Nathaniel, his presence a stark reminder of the authority that had just shifted hands. Judge Carter, we were informed of the situation. Are you all right? The weight of that single word, judge, hit the officers like a freight train. It wasn't just a title, it was a reality check. It was the destruction of whatever illusion of power they had clung to just moments ago. Nathaniel let the moment linger, let them stew in the consequences of their actions. The tension was suffocating, the unspoken understanding between them undeniable. Then, finally, he spoke. Yeah, I'm good. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was final. Minutes later, the same officers who had thrown him to the ground were now the ones in cuffs. Their power stripped away. Their arrogance shattered. Their world forever changed. The uniforms they once wore with misplaced confidence now felt like a burden they could no longer justify carrying. Nathaniel watched in silence as they were led into the squad car, their futures now in the hands of the very justice system they had tried to manipulate. There was no gloating, no satisfaction, just the unrelenting weight of truth settling into place. He turned back to his car, its shattered glass reflecting the cold, undeniable truth. Justice doesn't ask for permission. It takes its place. Lessons learned from this story. This story is a stark reminder that power should never be misused. Justice should be impartial, and assumptions based on appearances can lead to devastating consequences. Nathaniel Carter's experience highlights the importance of accountability, legal awareness, and the resilience of those who refuse to be silenced. It reminds us that true justice is not about authority, but about fairness and truth. A powerful message to take away. This story speaks to a deeper issue in society, the dangers of racial profiling, the abuse of authority, and the necessity of standing up against injustice. Nathaniel's quiet strength and calculated response showcase the importance of knowing your rights and maintaining composure in the face of adversity. Justice isn't given freely. Sometimes, it must be demanded. Personal reflection on this story. This story resonates on so many levels. It's not just about one man's experience, but about the systemic issues that affect countless others. It makes us question, how many others have suffered simply because of someone else's prejudices? How often does justice come too late, or not at all? Nathaniel's story is a wake-up call for everyone to recognize these injustices and demand change. If you found this story thought-provoking and powerful, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Story Precious. We bring you real, meaningful, and compelling narratives that shed light on important issues and inspire change. Hit the like button, share this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest content. Together, we can spread awareness and keep important conversations going. Justice doesn't ask for permission, it takes its place. Subscribe now to Story Precious for more stories that matter.